Welcome to the second video in this series covering technical concepts. In this video we're going to look over programming languages and some of the pros and cons and the impact they can have on your business that you might not realize if you're non-technical. We're going to look at various factors that impact which language you should decide to use when you're making an app. And before we jump in, you should also keep in mind that you're not necessarily limited to just one programming language. So you don't have to think about it as a all or nothing sort of thing. In a lot of cases, if necessary, you can always use a second language for various parts of your app. So the first thing we're going to look at is some cases where making the wrong choice in a programming language can fuck your company up. The first would be Facebook, where they originally wrote their app in PHP on the back end, and as a result they had trouble scaling as they added users, and they had to rewrite, actually make their own programming language called Hack, which is basically a hack around PHP to speed it up. Google originally wrote their web crawler in Python, and as the internet kept growing, as more people used it, their crawler basically froze up, it couldn't keep up, and they had to completely rewrite it in C++. Twitter is another example where they originally wrote in Ruby, and again, as they added users, they had to eventually rewrite in Java and Scala to prevent all sorts of issues with outages and stuff like that. On the other end is WhatsApp, where they originally wrote their app in Erlang, which is a pretty obscure language, but as a result, they're able to scale to, I think, like 500 million users with only 32 engineers, and that was a big part in why they got acquired for $19 billion, because their costs were so low because their app was so efficient and they're able to add so many users with no issues. On the other hand, one thing to keep in mind is you don't want to do premature optimization. You don't want to waste time worrying about scalability if you're just focused on getting your first users. So that's one thing when you look at all these big companies, that you don't always want to compare yourself in those cases. So on that note, it's all about finding the right balance when choosing the programming language you want to use. There's a bunch of factors that go into that, but we're going to focus on these four main ones. The first being developer productivity. As a startup, you want to be able to add features fast for your users, and so that should be a big factor. Is higher level programming language, like let's say Python, allows you to not have to worry about stuff like memory management. It takes care of that for you, so your developers are able to basically add features much faster. On the flip side, a lower level language like C or C++ has the potential to be much more efficient, which means you don't have to spend as much money on servers because the same amount of resources will get more work done. Another aspect is language popularity, which is going to help you if you have to hire developers. If you use something like we were talking about earlier with WhatsApp, where they used Erlang, it's much harder to find developers who know that language, so you're going to have to pay more generally because it's just a basic supply and demand question. And finally, there's ecosystem. Certain programming languages, they're used for certain types of tasks. If you're doing something with AI or data science, generally speaking, you're going to want to use Python, because otherwise you're going to have to build all your tools from scratch, and that's time where you can't focus on your own product. So now this is kind of a visual representation of what I'm talking about, where going here you have basically the speed of the language, and horizontally we have productivity in terms of how fast you're going to be able to add features. So popular language down here, like Python, is very productive, but it's also going to be a little bit slower, and this also goes for Node.js, which is a JavaScript, allows you to use JavaScript on servers. On the other end is very fast languages like C++, which are low level, but the trade-off is that you're going to be less productive because you have to do a lot of low-level stuff. Newer language, which is made by Google, is called Golang, or just Go, and it's kind of the best of both worlds in that it's very fast, almost as fast as C++, and it's also pretty productive. We'll go into why this might not be, in the future it'll probably be a good choice, but right now it's still a newer language, so it doesn't have two of those factors we were talking about earlier, which is popularity and the ecosystem. So one way of determining popularity is this index that you can Google, and Basically, it ranks the top 20 most used programming languages. It determines that with a variety of factors, but one thing to keep in mind is that popular isn't always the best. For example, you have PHP, which used to be very popular, but it's been steadily dropping off as better alternatives have popped up. For multi-purpose programming, Python's probably one of your best bets. It has a really good ecosystem and also rising popularity. You also have JavaScript. Golang, which I mentioned earlier, went up 2 spots in the last year. So it's gaining popularity over time, and I think that'll continue to rise. So the last thing we're going to cover is the tech stack. If you're going to be working with like a freelancer or an agency, you always want to ask them about their tech stack, which is basically, you can think about it as like kind of a part of the ecosystem of a programming language. So you want to make sure they're not using their own in-house stuff. Generally, you want to ask if they're using an open source project. For like web development, you'd have a framework like Django, which has a lot of adoption. There's a lot of people know how to use it. So if you eventually have to hire somebody else, you can do that easily. You don't want to be locked in. If they use their own in-house framework, you're basically not going to be able to find a programmer that's going to be able to work on that app. So they basically have you by the balls, and that they can charge you whatever they want because they know that there's really no other option for you to go to. So what these tech stacks do is, or the ecosystem around it, is it makes hiring easier and it also increases productivity. Stuff like Django solves a lot of common problems so that you don't have to do it from scratch. It allows you to add features faster. And a lot of them are also like this is the logo for React, which is a front-end framework that was released by Facebook. So, if Facebook's using it, it's not going to have any bugs. It's got a lot of usability features added in, basic stuff like that. So generally, always make sure that you're asking, if you're working with a freelancer or somebody, what they're using in addition to the programming language, because it's not just about the programming language, it's about the ecosystem around it as well. So that's basically all I wanted to cover for programming languages. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask below. I'll be doing more videos on this, so if you have any topics you want me to cover, you can also throw that in the comments and I'll try to make a video on that. If you like this video, hit like, subscribe, all that stuff. But for now, that's it. Thanks.